Here's everything you might have missed in Hawkeye Episode 1 and 2. The greatest gift for Hawkeye fans since the Jeremy Renner app is finally here. Hawkeye, the latest Disney Plus series, expands on one of the MCU's most underserved characters with an adaptation of the fan-favorite Matt Fraction and David Aja run that told one of Marvel's best street-level stories in ages. The first 2 chapters of this 6-episode series premiered on Wednesday and introduced us to one of the greatest crime-fighting duos in comics, Hawkeye and Hawkeye, Clint Barton and Kate Bishop.
Call you later.
No, please don't.
With Easter eggs, comic book references, and hidden details galore, we're going to break down everything that you might have missed in just a moment. And as always, if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com. But to talk about all of this in detail, we do need to spoil what happens in these first 2 episodes of Hawkeye. So if you haven't seen them yet and you're worried about that sort of thing, make like Clint and just tune us out.
Did you turn your hearing aid off?
I know what happens. I was there.
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? The first 2 episodes of Hawkeye kind of function as one big story, setting the stakes for what to expect from the rest of the series. It does a great job at introducing us to the impact that Clint Barton had both on a young Kate Bishop as Hawkeye and New York City's criminal underworld as Ronin in the wake of Avengers Endgame. And while several Avengers have died, only one of them literally bought the farm, and that is Clint Barton. And now, in the wake of saving the world from Thanos, the Earth's normalest hero, Hawkeye, is just trying to get home for Christmas. Between inadvertently taking Kate Bishop under his wing, fighting off New York City's criminal underbelly, and dealing with the stresses of holiday travel, Clint has his work cut out for him. Now, the series begins by taking us back in time to 2012, a simpler time, where we see a very different vantage point of the Battle of New York from Avengers. Before the Chitauri forces invade the Big Apple, we see a young Kate Bishop eavesdropping on her parents, Derek and Eleanor, arguing over financial troubles. In Kate's room, we can see some Cupid-like arrows on the wall foreshadowing her future hobby turned vigilante vocation. And during a long tracking shot of Kate wandering through the apartment, we see the damage the Chitauri attack has wrought. Through a giant hole in what likely used to be the family's office, you can see Stark Tower looming large in the background. Young Kate sees her life flash before her tiny eyes as a Chitauri fighter flies towards her, only to be stopped by a well-placed arrow from Hawkeye. We see Clint fighting goons on the roof of a building before doing his signature jumping shot immortalized in both Avengers and issue 1 of the Fraction Aja Hawkeye series. And much like Quentin Beck in Spider-Man Far From Home, it's a cool alternate perspective of an important moment in Marvel history. Except this time it motivates someone to start pursuing archery rather than getting really into drones, doxing, and attempted murder. This also marks a significant departure from Kate's comic book origin. While Kate's father is presumed dead in the show, complete with a funeral and everything, in the comics, Kate's dad is this aloof business idiot, and her mom is the one who goes missing while on vacation, only to pop up again years later as the mastermind behind the villain Madame Mask's actions. And look, we've delved into the theory that Vera Farmiga's Eleanor Bishop could be the MCU's version of Madame Mask, but based on these first 2 episodes, I'm not so sure that's still going to be the case. I think she's just a mom.
Just remember, I'm the mom.
What's consistent between the MCU and the comics, though, is that Hawkeye, above all others, inspires Kate through his heroism, and the fact that he's just a normal dude with tools dating back to the Paleolithic era, saving the world alongside literal gods, super soldiers, and people with fantastic powers. As we learned in all new Hawkeye number 6, Clint and the Avengers rescued young Kate from El Matador, a bullfighter turned villain with whom her dad had some shady business dealings. The encounter made a deep impression on young Kate and led to her idolizing Hawkeye like we see in the show. And we see exactly how deep that impression was in the title sequence for episode 1, which features artwork stylized to look like the Hawkeye comics of Kate training to become an elite martial artist, a gymnast, a fencer, and an archer. Essentially, she's turning herself into a living weapon capable of scampering up tall buildings to shoot arrows at a bell tower in a prototypical version of her comic book costume. Which is probably less heroic than she wanted, but it's what we have.
Nice outfit, by the way, Kate.
Yeah, well, sometimes you gotta dress the part.
Now, if you noticed, Kate breaks into Stane Tower, which presumably is named for Iron Man villain Obadiah Stane, who didn't build the college in a cave with a box of scraps, but rather with a sizable donation. Of course, this also raises questions about Obadiah's son, Zeke Stane, and whether or not he'll rear his ugly head in the MCU anytime soon. In Thrillist's oral history of the Avengers Battle of New York, Joss Whedon revealed one draft actually included Ezekiel Stane. If he does appear, the most logical place would probably be like Armor Wars or Ironheart, but introducing him as a member of New York socialite seen alongside the Bishop family isn't out of the question. Anyway, moving on, after a much more Christmassy overhead shot of Grand Central Station than we saw in Avengers, we catch up with Clint Barton and his kids at the Lunt-Fontanne Theater for a performance of Rogers the Musical, and their smash hit, I Can Do This All Day. This Captain America-themed Broadway musical is the natural evolution from Steve Rogers performing the Star-Spangled Man with the Plan on the USO tour way back in Captain America the First Avenger. It's also a reference to the real-life failed Captain America musical from the 1980s about Steve having a midlife crisis. With dancing versions of all your favorite Avengers, a Chitauri chorus line, and references to shawarma, it has everything that was a major part of the Battle of New York, and a few things that weren't.
You knew who wasn't there? It's that guy. Ant-Man.
And while Clint seems like he's dissociating at one point, it's actually because he's turned off his hearing aid. In episode 2, we learn that Clint incurred hearing loss over the years thanks to the nonstop parade of explosions, broken glass, and gunfire he's come into close contact with during his time as an Avenger. And although many people in New York are grateful for what the Avengers did, like the restaurant owner who comps their dinner, or the dude who asked Clint for a selfie while he's peeing, others aren't so happy, like the other guy who wrote Thanos was right on the theater urinal. Really, dude? You're going to the theater to deface the urinal there? What the hell, man? Now, speaking of Clint's time as an Avenger, he sees a little girl in the audience dressed as Black Widow who waves at him. Now, despite his half-hearted smile, Clint is still clearly feeling very guilty about what happened on Vormir in Avengers Endgame. Clint's daughter Lila can sense that her dad might be missing Natasha, noting that everyone misses her, but she was your best friend. Of course, all of this will come to a head when Yelena Belova arrives on the scene. Because as established in the post-credit scene of Black Widow, Countess Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, not to be confused with the Lunt-Fontaines who owned the theater, sent Yelena after Clint, claiming that he killed Natasha. And look, while that is technically true, it's also not technically accurate. But that's a problem for like episode 5 or 6 at the absolute earliest. Now, making her way home for the holidays, Kate visits her mom at a lavish apartment who's now incorporating a surprising amount of swords into her decorating scheme.
What's with all the swords, Mom?
This is because of her mom's surprise new fiancé, Jack Duquesne, a character that comics readers may recognize as Swordsman. First introduced in Avengers number 19, Swordsman trained a young Clint Barton in the arts of swordsmanship and thievery. This mustachioed malcontent eventually did join the Avengers and found himself in this deeply weird love quadrangle with Wanda, Mantis, and Vision before his untimely death at the hands of Kang the Conqueror. Kang watch. Here, though, he's been recast as a wealthy socialite with nearly as many secrets as he has swords, which is to say, a lot.
I'm convinced.
Case in point, we get to see those sword skills on display during Kate and Jack's unexpected dinnertime duel in episode 2, but more on that in just a bit. One of the most important secrets, though, seems to be that Jack's uncle, Armand III, is threatening Kate's mom and that both Duquesne boys are attending a top-secret black market auction during the charity gala. Before infiltrating the auction, though, Kate meets the most important character of this entire series, and that is Lucky the Pizza Dog, whose appearance, in hindsight, kind of foreshadows the arrival of the Tracksuit Mafia later in the episode. In the comics, he originally belonged to one of the members of the Tracksuit Mafia until Hawkeye takes the dog as his own. Back to that black market auction, though, this could also be taken directly from the pages of the comics during the 2-part Eucrita Tapes arc, which sees supervillains bidding on a doctored tape of Hawkeye appearing to murder a dictator. Here, though, they're after something that Hawkeye actually did murder people in. We see New York's wealthy, morally gray elite assembled to buy things like a Triceratops skull, which, in my headcanon, is confirmation of the Savage Land in the MCU. More importantly, though, we see Ronin's sword and costume are both up for sale.
I'm buying that sword.
Now, as we learned in Avengers Endgame, Clint spent the 5 years after the snap slicing, dicing, and murdering his way through the global criminal underworld. In particular, he cut a swath of terror through New York's criminal underbelly, as mentioned by the auctioneer. All that read in Clint's ledger made him a metric ton of enemies, including the Tracksuit Mafia, the vaguely Slavic street gang from the comics who proved to be our primary antagonists in the first 2 episodes.
Tracksuit Mafia.
That's their name? That's a little on the nose, don't you think?
And while Armand III buys Ronin's retractable sword, he isn't able to collect his ill-gotten gains, because members of the Tracksuit Mafia blow a hole in the wall to rob the auction. They're apparently looking for a watch that was recovered from the wreckage of the Avengers compound. Discovered outside by a dude in the alley, it has a red face which suggests to me that it belonged to Tony Stark. Perhaps it's similar to one of those nanotech gauntlets that contains a suit of Iron Man's armor, or maybe it's an errant quantum bracelet from their time-traveling adventures. And I suggest the latter only because the lot number on the auction card is number 268, and that corresponds to Avengers number 268, which is titled the Kang Dynasty. It involves the Avengers fighting Kang and his variants in Limbo, a realm outside of time and space, and that would make this a literal Kang watch. I know, Kang watch. Meanwhile, inside, Jack nabs Ronin's sword for himself while Kate dons the Ronin costume and starts fighting off these goons with surprisingly durable wine bottles. The seeming leader of the raid, wearing a brown coat and red balaclava, who later takes off his mask, is Fra Fee as Kazi. Better known as the Clown, he first appeared in Hawkeye number 8 and was hired by the Tracksuit Mafia to kill Clint Barton. So with all of that said, fingers crossed we'll see him don his iconic face paint at some point, because that is straight up terrifying in the comics. Outside the gala, Kate escapes the Tracksuit Mafia in the Ronin costume while managing to save Lucky the dog in the process from oncoming traffic. And that is a sequence taken straight out of the first issue of the comic. Although the original comic featured Clint rescuing Lucky, it makes sense narratively speaking to instantly endear us to Kate Bishop. You know, save the cat, this time it's save the dog. Taking Lucky back to her apartment to keep him safe, she gives the dog some leftover pizza, thereby satisfying the Hawkeye fandom's one demand to give us Pizza Dog as soon as humanly possible. Now, before being named Lucky, Hawkeye actually nicknamed the pup Pizza Dog in the comics because in their first encounter, he gave that dog a New York slice. Thankfully, we're also spared seeing that one-eyed good boy go through a traumatic vet visit, and we cut straight to the adorable chase. After breaking into Armand's townhouse, she finds monogrammed butterscotch there, which the old man in me really wants, but also she finds Armand himself dead in his parlor, stabbed to death by a sword, which, frankly, I want no part of at all. Now, on her way home, Kate finds herself surrounded by the Tracksuit Mafia and their tough guy leader, Ivan, who debuted in the very first issue of the Fraction Aha comics. Thankfully, Clint, having seen reports of this Ronin sighting on the news, arrives in the nick of time to kick butt, take names, and investigate this unexpected case of identity theft.
And who the hell are you?
Picking up in the immediate aftermath of Episode 1 Street Fight, Episode 2 begins with Kate taking Clint back to her apartment so they can debrief.
Can you sign this?
While Kate is fangirling over Hawkeye, we see a much better look at her place, which even has its own little archery range for indoor practicing. Unfortunately, they don't get much time to kick back and relax because the Tracksuit Mafia is already there. They know exactly who Kate Bishop is now, and they start hurling Molotov cocktails inside her apartment. Hawkeye yeets the mollies back at the goons outside, but ultimately they have to leave the Ronin costume in the burning apartment so they can escape in one piece. They go to get Avengers supplies, which for someone like Hawkeye doesn't mean high-tech armor or vibranium shields. Rather, it's Neosporin and rubbing alcohol because street-level problems require street-level solutions. And much like the source material, this series shows our heroes constantly getting beat to shit. Realizing they need somewhere to lie low, they take refuge at Kate's aunt's place. As we learn, Kate's aunt is Moira Brandon, a movie star that first appeared in Avengers West Coast number 100. In the comics, she sold her Palos Verdes estate to the West Coast Avengers to serve as their new base of operations. She also managed to save Hawkeye and Mockingbird's life from the villainous Crossfire in the process. Although in doing so she died from the exertion, Hawkeye made her an honorary Avenger before she shuffled off this mortal coil. Now her silver screen heritage is alluded to with a J.G. Ballard-esque movie poster for Creature of the Dark Galaxy, which fittingly co-stars someone named Luke Ballard, a digital artist who worked on several previous Marvel projects. Utilizing his background as a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, Clint infiltrates the crime scene by borrowing firefighter gear from FDNY Engine 54, a firehouse that lost all 15 of their brave first responders on September 11th, 2001. Now, although Clint doesn't find his Ronin uniform, he does find a sticker for a New York-based LARPing group. Which, yes, I said LARPing group. And that leads him to assume what any one of us would: a firefighter stole his ninja suit to LARP in. And folks, that is exactly what happened. NTAL, never trust a LARPer. Now, before Clint's unexpected side quest to the big LARPle in Central Park, we get a couple of nice moments. Kate officially refers to her canine companion as Pizza Dog, his nickname in the comics and the fandom. And then when Clint is sending his kids home ahead of him, we see his youngest son, Nate, is practicing American Sign Language to better communicate with his dad. Now, following that moment, Clint explains his hearing loss to Kate, which makes sense when you see it all laid out in montage form. Now, Hawkeye has actually had a long history of deafness and hearing loss in the comics. In 1983's Hawkeye miniseries, Crossfire, the same villain that attacked Moira's mansion, was using a machine to use a high frequency to turn people into violent psychopaths. In order to free himself of the mind control, Clint bit down on the tip of a sonic arrow to drown out the sound, which let him save the day but deafened himself in the process. As a result, Clint lost 80% of his hearing and began wearing hearing aids. Clint's hearing loss was retconned following the events of the Onslaught saga in the mid-90s, but more recently Clint's deafness was reintroduced by the Fraction Aha comics that inspired this show. Namely when the assassin clown, aka Kazi, stabbed Clint in the ears with his own arrows. Now, whether or not we'll see that particularly brutal scene in this show remains to be seen, but it'll likely give Clint an unexpected kinship with the deaf vigilante Echo, who we do see in the final moments of this episode. Now, moving on, we see a TV commercial for Rogers the Musical and a news report that Ronan is suspected in the murder of Armand Duquesne. On their way to Kate's mother's office at Bishop Security, Kate and Clint have a fun moment in Times Square where a kid asks to take a picture with a superhero, only to run past Clint to pose with someone dressed as Ant-Man and Katniss Everdeen. Now, in the background, we can also see people dressed as Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, but no Hawkeye. While peppering Clint about branding, Kate tries to cut through his aloof cool guy bullshit by telling him that he's actually selling inspiration, and she is case in point. Kate also mentions a fun gimmick like trick arrows, which Clint does lie about having as well, because we know from the trailers and that comic-inspired car chase, he absolutely has trick arrows. At Eleanor's office, Kate has an awkward encounter with her mother and Jack, the latter of whom she suspects is involved in Armand's murder. And speaking of which, Kate gets an unexpected call from the NYPD's Detective Caudle, who's interrogating Kate about her whereabouts the previous night and the fire that consumed her apartment. Caudle actually first appeared in Hawkeye number 14 as a detective based in Santa Monica, who Kate crossed paths with while investigating the shady florist Flint Ward during her time in Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Clint is tracking down a suspect of his own using what appears to be Reddit to find the nearest LARPers, which makes sense. Now, despite his reluctance to participate and lamenting the fact that he fought Thanos but now has to fight a LARPer, Clint actually has a pretty good time dueling the man who took his Ronin suit. As we learn, the costume thief's real name is Grills, who's actually one of Clint's neighbors in the comics, named for the fact that he's always grilling out on the rooftop. Now, honestly, the most upsetting part of this entire ordeal is Hawkeye stashing the Ronin outfit in a locker with maybe the easiest to crack lock in human history. But hey, that's Clint Barton for you. He does the bare minimum. He calls his wife Laura to catch up and reveals his next move, catch and release. Basically, Clint's gonna let himself get caught by the tracksuit mafia so he can learn what they're after when they release him. Now, Laura notes that this is actually one of Nat's old moves, presumably referring to Black Widow's interrogation scene trick way back in 2012's Avengers, where she only pretended to get captured until she learned what she needed.
I'm in the middle of an interrogation. This moron is giving me everything.
Now, back at Eleanor's apartment, Kate, Eleanor, and Jack have maybe the most awkward dinner in recent memory, full of thinly veiled statements about agitating risotto. This is followed by unexpected post-meal fencing, where Kate gets increasingly frustrated that Jack is going easy on her. She tries to prove that he's hiding something by striking at him when he's not looking, which he instinctively and easily parries. What really freaks her out, though, is when Jack offers her one of the monogrammed butterscotch candies from Armand's apartment. Now, this isn't proof that he killed his uncle, but it certainly isn't helping his case either, because, look, he has Ronin's stolen sword. That's still in his possession. His uncle died from a sword wound, and now he has the butterscotch. You do the math.
Smart as a whip, this one, huh?
Regardless, Kate is fighting a battle on two fronts, her mind games with Jack and her frustrated mother who just wants her daughter to graduate and come work for her at Bishop Security already.
Kate, if it's for work, I'm your boss. I'm pretty sure I can get you out of it. What's going on?
Now, as it turns out, Clint's strategy worked flawlessly as 3 vans full of tracksuit mafioso tag him and bag him and take him to a warehouse for interrogation. While Clint mocks their choice of warehouse, he tries to throw them off of Kate's trail because they think that she's Ronin. Using her highly advanced Bishop Security phone, though, Kate tracks Clint to the warehouse and then falls on her face trying to make a heroic entrance. And if you listen carefully, you can hear Avengers music playing in the background as well, but unfortunately, she brought a bow and arrow to a gunfight, and they are both incredibly outnumbered.
Oh, wow. Didn't realize we were supposed to bring guns.
Now, as the episode ends, we hear loud music from another room. We see a mysterious woman standing in front of a giant array of speakers, feeling the vibration through her body. Ivan tries mouthing words very dramatically to her because he doesn't know sign language. This is Maya Lopez, aka Echo, played by Alaqua Cox. Created by Joe Quesada and David Mack, Echo first appeared in Daredevil Volume 2, Number 9. Born deaf, Echo possesses the power of photographic reflexes kinda like Taskmaster, meaning she can replicate any physical movement that she sees. Over the years, she served as an assassin for Kingpin, donned the mantle of Ronin, and even fought alongside the Avengers during Secret Invasion. She's also been romantically linked to characters like Daredevil and Moon Knight. And as confirmed on Disney Plus Day, she's also starring in her own upcoming TV show as well, presumably spinning off of what happens in this show. But something tells me that she's gonna find some common ground with Clint and Kate rather than chopping them up into tiny little pieces. As for what the future holds, well, our heroes are going to have their work cut out for them escaping the tracksuit mafia, and something tells me their getaway will lead to that kick-ass car chase we've seen teased in previous trailers. But for now, that is everything we spotted in the first 2 episodes of Hawkeye. We'll have plenty of other MCU deep dives for you in the days ahead on Nerdist.com. But for now, tell us, what did you think of the Hawkeye premiere? Did you spot anything that we missed?
Nothing.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.